6, 7.
Do you know what's behind the lens? This is Ed Lachman, cinematographer, cameraman, DP, which stands for me, displaced person behind the lens. Anyway, I want to pose a few questions for you today. It's something that's bothered me that there's no standardization in the digital world for how we interpret exposure. And right now, there isn't a standard between manufacturers, even what they consider their IRE to represent. Do you even know what IRE stands for? The Institute of Radio Engineers. In 1895, well, 1895, that was when the Lumiere brothers made one of their first films. They didn't even have sound back then, but we're basing our exposure on radio signals from 125 years ago. And of course, a waveform monitor and histogram is a guide, but it wasn't specific enough for me. There's zebras and whatever animals you want to use. It didn't really interpret the exposure values for the specific areas of the frame. The window, all right, but how about the windowsill? We as cinematographers and image makers want to control the negative in a more specific way than, oh, it's good. What if we had a standardization for all cameras and manufacturers? I wanted to come up with an idea and reference really what I did in the photochemical world of how I controlled the negative, the look. Remember that, when we had cameras that looked like that, film negative? And I looked to Ansel Adams, who was a photographer, who created something called the zone system. And once I understood that the zone system worked out of 18% gray and different values of light, brighter or darker, were in relation to 18% gray, which photochemically, our meters are set up that way. And then I could control the look of the film through my meter, through the lab, through the film stock. I thought, why couldn't we do that in filmmaking, in the photographic media? And then when the digital world came in, I thought, why couldn't I interpret my image through 18% gray? And that would give a standard to all camera manufacturers, be it Arri, Sony, Panasonic, Red. 18% gray is 18% gray. We could then take a frame grab from the digital chip, and you could see a representation of the exposure in your frame and how much detail in either the highlights or the shadow area you want to hold. One would be able to create a frame grab of a scene and recreate it exactly in the exposure values at a later time. My proposal is we use 18% gray for gray. That's not too difficult. Then with 18% gray, you can judge the look of flesh tones in half and one-stop increments based on how you want to represent the flesh tone in exposure. Lighter tones are shown here in yellow values, or darker tones as green values. Then we go one-stop increments up to 6 stops, which would be warm colors, because overexposure is warm. We could see that, it's more intuitive. And underexposure would be darker colors like green, blue, purple. And they would each be one-stop increments based on 18% gray. It's a tool to also understand where you can hold your highlights and your shadow detail. To be clear, this is not false color. False color is based on IRE and does not track exposure and stops, but rather in percentages and voltage that aren't consistent with stop values used on our lenses or light meters. I'm casting no aspersions towards my DIT brothers and sisters, but I just want to put the control in the hands of the image makers, of the cinematographer. I don't want this idea to be in one camera. I want this to be a standard in the industry of how we use basically our camera as a light meter. So in closing, from behind the lens, you don't need to subscribe to anything. You don't need to push the button below. You don't have to buy anything. But if you would let camera manufacturers know that this could be a useful tool, it certainly would help me so I understand what I'm doing behind a digital camera, and hopefully it would help you too. Thanks.